Good evening. My name is Paul Larner, and I am chairman of the board of Wakefield Country Day School. This is the fourth and next to last in the fall series of WCDS Online Seminars. 2 weeks from tonight, the fall series concludes with a seminar led by our own John McCaslin, editor of the Rap News and former White House correspondent. You can find more information on our WCDS seminars and listen to previous recordings at wcdsva.org. Tonight, I am going to interview Lacy Wright about his long career as a Foreign Service officer. Please submit all questions via chat, and I will ask Lacy to respond as appropriate. Lacy, thanks for making yourself available tonight to this largely Wakefield audience, of which I believe there are many students. Maybe I could start by asking you, how is it that you came to join the Foreign Service?
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I joined the Foreign Service, I guess, because, well, I'll tell you how it started. I was a student, I was studying in Rome, and I had a friend who knew somebody at the American Embassy in Rome. And he and I went over one day and talked to this person. That was the first time I'd ever been in an embassy, first time I'd ever met a Foreign Service officer. And I was impressed with everything that I saw. And so when I left there and came back to the United States, I decided that that is what I wanted to do. And I took the Foreign Service exam. I took it in Chicago and passed and came into the Foreign Service at the very end of 1967.
And how well did you feel that your college education prepared you for a career in the Foreign Service?
Well, my education was in something that is as far removed from practical life as you can imagine. My degrees were in philosophy and theology, so not a lot of practicality there. But at the same time, I had a pretty good grounding in some of the things that are important in the Foreign Service. I traveled a bit. I was good in English. I was relatively well read. And all of that helped me to succeed in the exams. I might say that it's an interesting fact that there is no educational qualification that you need to have to come into the U.S. Foreign Service. That sets us apart from the foreign services of most countries. But our philosophy is that if you can pass the exam, you can get in. You know, in many countries, most countries probably, the need for a degree is, when you think about it, a little bit anti-democratic. Only people, and in some countries, it's rare to get to go to a university. It's becoming increasingly common here, but it's not everywhere. So that, and there's another factor here, and that is that our Foreign Service has no language requirement to get in. We put a tremendous amount of emphasis on languages, but you don't need to speak a foreign language in order to get in. In Italy, for example, you needed to speak both English and French at a very high level to get into the Italian Foreign Service. And that too was a sort of class barrier, because who can do that except people who are wealthy enough, whose parents were wealthy enough to have studied in an English-speaking and a French-speaking country. So we have none of that.
Does that serve as a disadvantage to the diplomatic corps of the United States over the long haul, and that the Foreign Service officers are not necessarily or required at the time they commence their service to speak foreign language as well?
No, I would say not at all, because we have in the Foreign Service Institute in Washington, we have what I imagine is one of the premier language schools in the world. And typically our diplomats in a given country tend to speak the local language much more often than the diplomats of other countries. Mm-hmm. For example, even in Vietnam, we had many scores of Foreign Service officers who spoke excellent Vietnamese. Right. No other country could have claimed that.
Yeah, and not an easy language to learn to speak. So, Lacy, after you first joined, what was your first posting?
Vietnam. And you remember that I told you I came in at the end of '67. That was right smack in the middle of the Vietnam War. Most of the people in my incoming class were assigned to Vietnam, and that was typical in those years. The only question you had in your mind when they handed out the first assignment was, will I not have to go to Vietnam? And the answer was usually, yes, you will.
Yeah, so you rang the bell, and one of our mutual friends tells me that you had quite some illustrious and heroic work that you achieved in Vietnam right after the war ended.
Well, I guess you're referring to the very last day during the evacuation. And I have to say that stands out as the most consequential and exciting day of my career. I was one of the people who left in the evacuation off of the embassy roof by helicopter. So it was a sad day for our country, but it certainly left a lasting impression on me.
Yeah, and for our Wakefield students who are much too young to know about that episode in American history, maybe they can see some of those things on YouTube. It's quite a spectacular and moving events that occurred there at the end of the Vietnam War. So, Lacy, after Vietnam, where did you go next?
Well, after Vietnam, first of all, I was in Vietnam twice. I went there in as my first assignment in the Foreign Service. And then I went to London for 2 years, and I went back to Vietnam. And that's the one that we were just talking about. And I was there until the end. But to answer your question, in between, I was in London, which is quite a bit different from Vietnam, of course.
And give us a brief description of your other major postings during your career.
Well, after that second tour in Vietnam, I'll just read them out to you. I was in Milan, came back to Washington, was in Bangkok. We went to Mexico City. We went to Trinidad and Tobago. After that, Jamaica, then Brazil. I retired from Brazil, but then several years ago, as a retired officer, I spent 3 years in Laos. So there you have it.
Right. So among all of these exciting and geographically disparate locations, I'm curious, which ones did you enjoy the most and the least?
You know, when people ask me that, I give a very waffly answer. And my first response is, I liked all my assignments. There's not one that I can think that I can name that I wish I hadn't gone to. But to zero in on your question, I really liked Milan. I was in Italy. We were there for 2.5 years. I liked the Caribbean, both Trinidad and Jamaica, terrific places. I liked Brazil, of course. I liked Laos. I liked London. And they were all great for different reasons, all very different. But I think that's one of the things that makes the Foreign Service a fascinating place to live, that you get to go to a lot of different places, and all of them have something to offer, and all of them supply you with great memories.
Right. Now, as I have observed, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, the life of a Foreign Service officer is pretty nice. As I understand it, you get to work about 10 in the morning. You spend a couple hours, you go out for a 2-martini lunch. You come back to the office for a few hours, and then you go for maybe a massage, and then you go out to the Italian embassy for dinner, and socialize. Is that an inaccurate or accurate description of the lifestyle?
No, that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
No wonder it's so hard to get in.
Well, to give you a slightly more serious answer.
Paul, I think you were describing an attorney's life there, right?
There is a little bit of that. There is a little bit of that. And not the 10 o'clock in the morning business, but some of the rest of it. But there's a lot of work involved in an embassy, say, and which I'd like to get into in a little bit. But don't forget that a lot of the places that a Foreign Service officer goes are not very nice places. And they're places that in some cases are dangerous. In other cases, there is a lot lacking in the way of creature comforts, and almost always, you're far away from your family,
Right.
At least your extended family, whom you don't very often.
Now, you educated us earlier that the United States is unique in that it doesn't require fluency in foreign languages to be admitted to the Foreign Service. But how about once you get in? What's the process to be trained in foreign languages? And can you ever rise or succeed in the Foreign Service as a career diplomat without quite extraordinary skills in foreign languages?
Well, foreign languages are, of course, really important in the Foreign Service. If you go to a country, let's take Italy, when I was there in the late 1970s. If you go to Italy and you never learn to speak Italian, your utility is pretty minor. So the State Department, therefore, has a very good language school. You study there and when you study there, you do so exclusively. You don't do anything else. You come back to Washington, you live, you work 6 or 8 hours a day just on the language. And in really hard languages like Arabic and Chinese, the State Department may send you to Taiwan or to another or to an Arabic-speaking country for the second year of your language. So it's taken very seriously. It's incentivized. Once you test out at a certain level in a language, you get a little bit of a bonus. And your main incentive is that you really can't do your job very well. If you're a political officer, say, and you can't talk to people, what good are you? And so all of that, all of those things act as big incentives to take language learning very seriously, and people do.
So which languages do you happen to be the most proficient in other than English?
Well, as you've noticed, my English is really good.
But you're obviously...
But let's start out with that. No, I speak...
You almost speak like a native. I can barely discern the Russian accent.
Yeah, I've gotten rid of my Springfield, Illinois accent, huh? Well, I did speak Vietnamese modestly well when I was in Vietnam, but I've lost a lot of it. Today, I would say my best languages are French and Italian. I did speak good Portuguese when I was in Brazil, but not having used it since then, I'm afraid it's mostly gone. I've started to study Spanish recently, and so I'm doing okay at that. But I do love languages, and I'm studying them. I'm studying right now fairly seriously both French and Spanish.
Well,
French, I've studied all my life, but you never quite get there, so I keep studying.
well, I'm glad to hear that. I didn't want you to fall behind in those important duties. So, Lacy, one question I've always had. Well, let me begin with a prelude. Perhaps you could explain to the audience what's the difference between working for the State Department and working as a Foreign Service Officer.
Well, the Foreign Service officers are part of the State Department. They're not all of the State Department. There are lots of other people who work in the State Department. There are a lot of civil servants who work in the State Department. There are a lot of technical people, IT people, for example, tremendous number, very important, who are in the State Department. The Foreign Service, I would say, are the kind of the core of the State Department and the core of an embassy. In an embassy, in a big embassy, the Foreign Service officers are vastly outnumbered by other kinds of people, whether they are military attachés or commercial officers or people who work from the agriculture department, FBI, all kinds of Washington agencies have people stationed at embassies. So
Right.
in any embassy, the Foreign Service officers are a minority.
Right. If my memory is correct, I think there are about 6,000 Foreign Service officers, but probably 90,000 people that work for the State Department.
Yeah, I don't know if there are that many people, but I don't know off the top of my head, but I think on the number of Foreign Service officers, you're probably right.
Right, right. So now, are you assigned to a particular area of concentration or responsibility at the beginning of your career or shortly thereafter?
Yes, you are. In fact, right away, you have to make a choice among what are called cones. And there are 5 of them now. And they are the political cone, the economic, management, consular, or public diplomacy. And you have to opt for one of those right away. And most people, I would say, stay in whatever that is their whole career. Doesn't mean you can never be assigned to anything else, but it means that that's your default place to go.
Right, right. You know, one of the concerns that I've heard voiced about joining the State or the Foreign Service would be that it's very difficult to get to the highest levels of the State Department as a Foreign Service officer, because the highest levels are reserved for political appointees. And this is also true even lower than the highest level at the ambassador level, where the plum assignments consistently, whether in Democratic or Republican administrations, are reserved for political appointments. And I wonder how you feel about that, and whether it was ever a disincentive that you witnessed to continue a career at the State Department, because, for example, in the corporate life, you know, it doesn't really matter if you join Walmart as a clerk, there's no flat out prohibition as a matter of policy that you can't rise to be CEO.
Well, this is a constant topic of conversation in the Foreign Service, as you can imagine. But there's nothing surprising about it to a Foreign Service officer. That's the way it always has been. That's the way one expects it always will be. It is just too tempting for a president, any president, Democrat or Republican, to forego the chance to give these assignments, not just to big donors, although that's often the case, but also to people who are prominent in their fields, maybe, and very much in sync with what the administration wants to do. And after all, some of our most distinguished ambassadors have been political appointees.
Right.
I'm thinking of Ellsworth Bunker in Vietnam, Henry Cabot Lodge at the Vatican, people like that. That said, this is a practice that no Foreign Service officer likes very much.
Right. Is it consistent with how other nations handle their diplomatic corps?
No, it's not necessarily. For example, Italy has, which is a country where favoritism is not unknown. Italy has no politically appointed ambassadors. In fact, they tell the story that the Gianni Agnelli, who was the head of and of the family that owned Fiat, and was a massively important man in Italy in his day, tried to become ambassador to the United States and failed. So that tells you that there's a country that just doesn't do it. Other countries, it's a mixed bag, I guess.
So on a related point, Lacy, do you feel that as a Foreign Service officer, any frustration at having to toe the line on policy rather than be the critical voice in creating policy? And just to give you an example, last summer we saw your, I would say, somewhat typical state Foreign Service officer for in the Ukraine on TV. He spoke the language fluently, tremendously qualified, and understood the Ukraine situation. But I wonder how much latitude, if any, he has to change or influence policy coming down from on high, whether it's the president or the Secretary of State. And part of the life of a Foreign Service officer is learning to toe the line.
Well, you've just talked about George Kent, who is a terrific Foreign Service officer and knows everything there is to know about Ukraine. His wife is Ukrainian, and he spent a lot of his career in that part of the world. And he's a terrific example of a highly, highly competent Foreign Service officer. Well, there are, we live in we are in a system where the president makes the policy in the end, and one has to live with that. I would say that George Kent, though, had his say in court. And in fact, he had a podium where he could talk to the entire United States and elsewhere, and he acquitted himself tremendously well. And he didn't, I guess the side that you would say he was on did not prevail there, but I wouldn't say that he had no influence.
Right.
Now that we're on this subject, there is a facility within the State Department called the Dissent Channel, which you may know about. And it exists in order to encourage and protect people who have a different view on a policy matter. And it's used very frequently. Most of the time it's used, it never becomes public, but that's a way for people in the Foreign Service to voice their differences with a given policy. It's taken very seriously. What you put into the Dissent Channel is read and it's responded to. So there is a kind of safety valve. But in the end, the president, as he should, in general, makes the policy.
Right. Lacy, we have a few minutes left before I think we've got numerous questions that I want to pose to you from the audience. But I want to spend just a minute or two on a mutual passion that you and I share, which is travel. And, we've spent time traveling in Vietnam and Laos and in Thailand and Burma. And I wonder if you could give our Wakefield students your thoughts on when to travel, the importance of travel in terms of your education, and what it means to you and how you would or recommend they approach that at these early years in their lives.
Well, that's a tremendous subject. Unfortunately, right now, all bets are off, as we all know, but this will be over one of these days, and life will return to a more normal set of circumstances in that respect, and all of us can travel again. It's if you're a young person, what a wonderful thing to be able to travel. And today it's easier and more affordable, I guess, than ever. When I was a student, I was fortunate enough to be able to travel around Europe. I went to Eastern Europe. I went on my own. It was a great experience. And anybody with the funds, and they're not out of reach now, I don't think, for most people, can do this. And so if you can do it, if you can go with a few friends, that's terrific. One always has to be a little bit careful. When you go to places that you don't know anybody, you don't know the customs, you may not know the language, you have to take all that into account. You don't want to put yourself in harm's way, but if you use some common sense, it's just such a great thing to do that you shouldn't pass it up.
Yeah. I've been a huge advocate of travel my whole life. I was fortunate that my parents took me to England when I was 8 years old, and they always encouraged travel. And I think it's a fabulous thing to expand one's education and horizons in the only way that, and only in ways that only travel can. A few days ago, I was in my car and I was listening to a NPR interview on travel, and I was astounded that the two people being interviewed, one was Gloria Steinem, and the other was David McCullough. So Gloria Steinem is famous as a women's rights activist and author, and David McCullough is a historian who's written on everything from John Adams to others. And they went, the interview was delightful. I couldn't believe that Gloria Steinem spent several months in Southern Africa among the Kung San people. And David McCullough was similarly a huge advocate of the importance of travel and education. So Lacy, I'm going to end our first part of this session before I call up the chat questions, just by asking you whether you would recommend to our students online here a career in the Foreign Service.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, of course, you have to like these things that a Foreign Service officer has to do. You have to be ready to be assigned anywhere in the world. And that can mean London, but it can also mean Ghana or some far island nation. But all of them have their fascination. So I don't regard that as a restriction, but some people might. But if you like languages, if you like to travel, if you like to be involved in international questions, political questions, economic, that kind of thing, then it's a tremendous opportunity. You also, by the way, although I would say probably most people come into the State Department and stay as a career, a lot of people don't. They come in and they stay for 5, 6 years. They decide that they would rather do something else, and they go off and do that, having profited, I think, from the time they spent in the Foreign Service.
Right. Okay, Lacy, I'm going to begin with a couple of chat questions. First one, let me pull it back up here. This is from Jim Wood. Do those passing the Foreign Service exam usually succeed as Foreign Service officers? That is, it is effectively selective, self-selective.
Well, first of all, you don't get to see if you can succeed unless you pass the Foreign Service exam and get into the Foreign Service. So the question is, then I guess becomes, does everybody in the Foreign Service succeed? And I would have to say no. Some people do not do well, and that's a minority, but of course it happens, as it must happen in every walk of life. And some people stay a few years, they don't do well, they leave.
Is there a
surprise?
Is there a common characteristic among the people who either don't succeed or leave within 5 or 10 years?
Well, that I don't know, but I'll tell you an example of what I'm talking about, I think. When I was in Milan, I was the Deputy Consul General, and I guess there maybe were 10 or 15 Foreign Service officers there. And so I was the supervisor of 2 or 3 people. And we had a young fellow come to be the economic officer of the consulate. He had just gotten married. He came with his wife, his first assignment. And he clearly, it soon became very clear that Foreign Service life was not for him. He he went to the Consul General and he complained once that people in the consulate kept inviting him to dinner. And he said, I didn't join the Foreign Service to be invited to dinner. I joined the Foreign Service to do economic work. So now here was a fellow who just didn't get it. You can't.
Oh, you mean what I said earlier was right? You go to dinners 5 nights a week at fancy restaurants or other embassies.
You know, I mean, you have to like people. You have to be at ease with people. You have to be at ease in exchanging views and opinions with people. That's an essential part of the job. You can't be a monastic personality and do well in the Foreign Service.
All right. Okay, let me pull up some more questions here. Do you use an online app to study Spanish?
Yeah, Yes, I do. And I do something else which is even more interesting, I think, which I'd like to mention. I've been in touch with a company, and I do this both in French and Spanish, that supplies you with native speakers, and you connect with them by Zoom or one of the other platforms. And I found it terrifically satisfactory. I do now French once a week. I talk to a fellow Frenchman who for some reason lives in Mexico. He's very serious about this. You can design your hour with him any way you want. And it's not very expensive. And it's a terrific facility. Now, but to get back to your question, there are all kinds of things on the web that will help you learn a language. One of them is that some enterprising people have one way or another gotten hold of Foreign Service Institute language tapes and turned them into and have arranged them so you can play them on the web. So that's good. But there are just so many possibilities now that never existed before. It's terrific.
Right. I'll just voice my opinion that I think one thing that the Foreign Service does, and also the Peace Corps where I was involved, is they do an absolutely spectacular job at teaching foreign languages, and foreign languages that no one else in the world has ever heard of, or very few people. And, you know, it's a tremendous resource for our country to develop this expertise in these areas of the world and in these languages. Let me go for a couple other questions here, Lacy. Are you a fan of international cuisines because of your travel? What is your favorite international food?
Yes. Well, I must say that I like all cuisines as long as they're either French or Italian. Well, those are my favorites. Those are my favorites. But of course, there are lots of other. Thai cuisine is wonderful. Lao cuisine is good. Japanese, and of course, Spanish, all the Latin American cuisines. So there's so much to choose from. But it's wonderful to be able to have experienced a number of these different kinds of foods.
All right. Not only that, you get them for free at all those fancy meals. Here, I'm going to combine two questions. Do you teach yourself all the languages learn? Maybe you could, you've described that already, but maybe you could describe what it's like to be in one of the intensive language programs, like before you went to Vietnam or maybe before you went to Brazil.
Well, when we studied Vietnamese, that was probably the most intensive course I ever took. It was not full immersion, but it was intense. And we would go to class to different classes, by the way, for about 6 hours a day. And then you were expected to go back home and listen to tapes or whatever you had and continue that. Within in the classroom, the Foreign Service Institute at that time exposed you to two different kinds of people. One was a native speaker, so some Vietnamese person that had been hired here just to speak to you and go through the exercises with you. Then you also had an American who was your, I forget what they were called, but that was the person you went to ask questions about grammar or structure or anything else that was not just pure repetition of exercises. And that worked pretty well. Now, this was some time ago that I'm talking about, so I'm sure that the Foreign Service Institute has grown like any other good institution, and they have other things. I did take a French course about 5 years ago remotely, and it was terrific. It had all kinds of very interesting software that came along with it. Of course, as you've just intimated, the best way to learn a language is to go to live in a country and go to live in a village where nobody speaks English.
Right.
That is the ultimate. Unfortunately, I've never been able to do that.
Right. Another question is there a posting you wish you had had, and how would you describe your career path within the Foreign Service? Because you rose to quite a high level as deputy ambassador and acting ambassador. So a posting you wish you had and a description of your career path.
Well, if you're looking for any logic in my career path, you will not find it, at least in terms of the places.
Does that include your presentation to us here tonight?
But by the way, when Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State, one of the policies, the internal policies that he imposed on the State Department, or he made maybe he made formal, was that people were supposed to go to different parts of the world during their career. They were not supposed to only stay in Arabic-speaking countries, for example. They were supposed, if you really wanted to rise in the Foreign Service, you were supposed to have a whole variety of geographic and other kinds of experiences during your career. And so I think that that's a good thing. To go back to your question, any place I wish I had been assigned to, yes, Paris. Not because of anything it would have done for my career, but the great things it would have done for my French.
And how is it that you were able to slug your way up the ladder so successfully? Because you're a diplomat?
Well, needless to say, there is a lot of competition in the Foreign Service. And in fact, I think that there may have been more then than there is now. Today, I'm still working for the State Department, by the way, and today I see that there is there's a much bigger emphasis on team building in the Foreign Service than there was before, which is a very good thing. There's also a huge demographic shift among people in the State Department in favor of women, which is a good thing, and in favor of people who come from ethnic backgrounds, from other countries, people whose names tell you that their parents or their grandparents came from Vietnam or India or somewhere else. And that too, I think, has enriched the Foreign Service.
All right. Well, Lacy, I'll check see if we have maybe one more question. Can you briefly describe what the Foreign Service Officer test is about? I heard the best way to prepare for the test is reading magazines like The Economist.
That's not bad. That's not a bad piece of advice. People are fond of saying that you cannot prepare for the Foreign Service exam because it's too varied. When I took it, and I expect some of this is still the same, it was in 4 parts. There was an English part, there was an economic part, there was a a news part, and there was, I think, a public diplomacy part. And you get graded separately in each of those areas. And by the way, you know that there is, first of all, I'm describing the written exam. You have to pass the written exam before you go on to the oral. The written exam today, I'm told, is different in one important respect from what it was when I took it. When I took it, I sat before a panel of 3 people for 2 hours, and they asked me questions and I answered. Today, it's much more interactive. People are put on teams. It lasts the whole day. You're asked to play roles. Somebody plays the ambassador, somebody plays the general, somebody plays the head of an insurgency, and so on, which is more difficult, I think, than it was when I took it. But at any rate, those are the 2 parts, the written and the oral.
Right. Well, Lacy, I want to finish up by thanking you not only for your long career serving our nation, but also your discourse this evening and willingness to share with our students what the life of a foreign service officer is like. Is there anything else you would like to say to the audience, which is one of our largest audiences ever on our Zoom series, in closing?
Right. Yeah, I'd like to say one thing. We've talked about embassies, but we haven't really gotten in very much to what they do. And one of the things that embassies around the world do, and our government does, that is often below the radar, and I think most people don't pay it much attention, is that in many, many countries around the world, we are helping other governments to upgrade their rule of law and their adherence to international best practices and all that. We help train police services. We try to school them in human rights standards that they might not otherwise learn about. We train prosecutors. We train judges. We are working in anti-human trafficking. We're working in anti-money laundering. And all of those are the kinds of things, by the way, that are done by the bureau that I work in at this moment. But we do this all over the world, and other countries do it too, by the way. Our European partners, Japan and others, mostly friendly countries to us, do the same kind of thing. And it's really very valuable, in my view, and it's not very much recognized.
Right. Well, Lacy, thank you again. And let me just close by asking, for our student audience who may have supplemental questions or want to learn more about working in international diplomacy, would you be available by email to respond to any questions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'd love to do that. I'd welcome that. And if anybody writes to me, I will certainly respond.
Right. Maybe sometime in the post-COVID era, we can even have you out for a visit to Wakefield.
Good. And will there be a free meal attached to it?
Absolutely. And it's going to, we only do French cuisine.
Well, I can accept right here on the spot then.
All right. Hey, thanks again. And here's to our next trip together.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Paul. It was a great pleasure.
Right. Bye-bye.